1-0 for Borussia Dortmund. And remember in the preview video I was talking about, there was a great deal to discuss in terms of if Dortmund could replicate then. And Dortmund replicated and then some. It was a great defensive effort. You're going to see it based on how the statistics ended up working out, and also how Dortmund kind of played a very well composed match. It was Schlotterbeck and Hummels. Of course, I have to say Hummels, man of the match, no doubt about it, obviously scoring the goal, but what he did in the middle alongside Nico Schlotterbeck to be able to really fend off, and eventually it became a line of three, and that line of three really solidified and consolidated, even in the darkest of times, because at one moment you saw Dortmund playing virtually a back line of six. The line started getting constricted. They were pushed back inside of their own 18. It looked very bleak at a moment for Dortmund, but they still had enough of a cushion to kind of drop back and relax and be composed enough to understand what they needed to do with the ball as soon as they cleared it out and recovered. Although PSG continued pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and going forward wave after wave, they just couldn't find a way. It was interesting. I was just looking on X, and I see, of course, the legendary commentator for the Bundesliga, Phil Bonny, talking about what this match was. He said, "Yeah, man, the frame was also afraid." I think it was something like the frame signed a new contract until 2028, and he was absolutely right. I mean, if you're PSG and you hit the woodwork 6 times in this entire series, it's a tough case, man. It is a very, very difficult set of circumstances for you to try and overcome things as I adjust on the fly. My cameraman couldn't come in today, so it was interesting to see out wide that it was initially Hakimi and Dembele trying to create. You know, it was again down the right side, looking either to create the shot either off of one or the other. If not, then trying to loop that ball out to the other side, because Mbappe was playing on the left, a little bit further out on the left, to be able to receive those balls and open the Dortmund defense a little bit more. It just never worked out. Yeah, the intensity and the pace were there for PSG early on. It was interesting because it was more linear, it was more vertical than it was a triangulation of the ball, or getting the ball better circulation, because Warren Zaire Emery never really got involved in that action. It took a long time for him, so much so that it was the 75th minute when Zaire Emery comes off, and he'd pretty much come off 30 minutes too late. I mean, save for the goal that he misses, that the ball comes in and he ends up volleying it first time, goes right out the post. The very, very tough break for him, but it wasn't his best match. And it was one of those moments that you started to realize that PSG were going forward more on momentum than they did with organization, because it was, yeah, I mean, they have the players to individually make things happen, and they created some interesting things in the first half, although they really never put a lot of strain on Borussia Dortmund in front of the goal. Now, second half, a different story. You saw them, of course, they were just very disorganized in attack. Now, there was one thing that I did notice during that match that was very interesting as it progressed. And to a certain extent, it created a couple of good opportunities for Dortmund. It just seemed that PSG were leaving spaces. Remember what I said earlier on, or in the preview video, and if you haven't seen it, like I said, make sure you check it out, where PSG leaves spaces. Of course, in the previous match, it was pushing forward and leaving their backs, and Nicholas Füllkrug being able to score the only goal of the match. Well, in this case, you started to see a lot of Jadon Sancho moving in the middle. You saw a lot of Julian Brandt, and Julian Brandt had a great game today as well, as he was able to, move that ball around very well. Sancho also had a very good game down the left. The opportunity that leads to Adeyemi's shot that's saved by Donnarumma. That's where one specific moment where you see that concept or that notion end up coming to fruition a little bit more. In my opinion, that was the best opportunity of the first half. Even though Donnarumma ends up making the save, to me that was the best opportunity of the first half. And as I'm being bitten by mosquitoes here, but no big deal. I'll be quick with this. Yeah, another player that I liked a lot was Sabitzer, at least in the first half. There was really no reference for him. No one really was using or seeing where he was because he was coming in and out. At times he was next to Fulkrug, at times he was dropping back, at times he was over on the right, he was on the left. He was all over the place, but he kind of disappeared and kind of go right back in. You saw him truly being mobile, and no one from PSG was able to get a reference of him during that encounter. So that was interesting as well. And as the minutes would wear on in the first half, Dortmund just became more and more and more and more solid defensively. Of crosses that would come, Hummels would clear it out. Schlotterbeck would play the ball out quickly. Matson over on the left really was able to shut down Hakimi at a certain point. So much so that at certain stages of the match, it was Matson making more runs and Hakimi having to defend than the other way around. So you started seeing that as well. One very, very interesting thing that I did see, and how you neutralize Mbappe, is, well, when he has the ball, it's difficult because he depends a great deal on himself. And he depended a great deal on himself today. There were a couple of instances, at least 3 or 4 that I saw, about 1 or 2 in the first half and about 2 or 3 in the second, when Mbappe has the ball out wide and he tried to play off a teammate. In a lot of cases, it happened to be Vitinha that he'd try and partner off. He'd give the ball off to Vitinha, he'd make the run, but he'd have 1 or 2 players accompanying him. So all of a sudden, Vitinha looks, there's no option outside, so you have to play around the perimeter. And it didn't work out for PSG in terms of really creating and exploiting those spaces because there was no space to exploit. That was great what Dortmund were doing, as they were at times compensating and sometimes not even overcompensating. PSG did a lot of overcompensating in terms of their shifting as well. So that was interesting to see as well. How Dortmund says, okay, we'll give him the ball, we'll give him opportunities, but he's going to have to make it on his own. And a lot of times he almost did, but it ended up being a very silent factor, if you can even say he was present a lot of the time, because he tended to disappear a lot because PSG couldn't really organize themselves in such a manner where they saw him as the first focus. And also, when the ball's on the other side of the pitch, very difficult for him to get involved. The goal. Marquinhos makes the mistake. It ends up going out being a corner. 2 things. There's two fingers to point. The first one is Gigi Donnarumma. Donnarumma has to come out. The people, oh, but he can reach. Yeah, but you as a goalkeeper inside of your area, you are a meter 96. That's 6'5", almost 6'6" for people watching in the United States. I mean, you're basically a power forward in the NBA, and if you can't come out and receive that ball or cut that ball off inside of your own area, then you're in trouble. You need to take advantage of that height. Donnarumma stays planted and watches the ball go through, and not only kind of hesitates, he also sees that Beraldo loses his mark and just stands there. Mats Hummels comes in, heads the ball 1-0. So you had a lot of defensive breakdowns in that particular play that end up creating what was the only goal of the match, and basically the goal that just kind of seals the deal, although there was still a lot of suffering that Dortmund had to endure at that stage. I'd put, why was Hummels open? Yeah, of course, because Beraldo ends up losing his mark completely, and as soon as Hummels makes the run inside, Beraldo takes that extra half a second to figure out what happened, and he also thought that Donnarumma was coming out. He waits for Donnarumma, and all of a sudden Hummels was gone. He was beat. So that was something that had to be looked at as a very impressive defensive posture by Edin Terzic and company that really created what ends up being the game-winning match for Dortmund that ends up basically putting them in Wembley in less than 3 weeks. Interesting to say that, because honestly, I think that's the last time that they got to the Champions League final. It happened to be over there as well, if memory serves me correctly, when they played Bayern, and Bayern ended up winning the Champions League that year in extra time. PSG had not been shut out, we'll put it that way, in consecutive matches since last year. You have to go back to March 19th, and then of course on April 2nd when they faced Lyon and Stade in Ligue 1. Since then, they had not gone 2 consecutive matches without scoring. Now, what makes this, of course, even more impressive is that the 2 matches that they ended up losing and they did not score in happened to be both against Dortmund. So that ends up showing you the great defensive work. And of course, as I've said before, the numbers that Dortmund have put up defensively have truly been what has carried this team through the Champions League. And, of course, timely goals and good opportunities. Of course, well-deserved for Dortmund to be able to get to the Champions League final again for the first time in 11 years. We'll see what ends up happening, and we'll end up seeing what ends up happening in the European Clásicos, they're now calling it, between Bayern Munich and Real Madrid. Of course, that match will be tomorrow over at the Santiago Bernabeu. I'll have a preview for that. I'll have a reaction for that. And, of course, you can check me out when I am over on Sportsmax as well later on this afternoon, as I'll be delving in and giving you basically the same details that I gave you just now. Talk to you soon.